Welcome everyone to another Tech 90. You got myself, Greg Brunts. I am the commercial technical support specialist for commercial products with TradeWinds GREE. And with me, I have Robert. Robert, you want to introduce yourself again?
Good morning, everybody. My name is Robert Arias. I am the GREE commercial specialist and technical advisor.
And I also have Jesus with us. Jesus, you want to introduce yourself again?
Yep. Good morning, everyone. Jesus Fraga, commercial VRF inside sales.
Okay, so today we're going to be presenting on our introduction to MultiPRO Commercial Part 2. So Part 1 was last week. I do believe that was posted on YouTube, so you can go and see Part 1 if you haven't seen it. Our schedule today, first we'll run a clip from recent training that covers introduction of GREE selection software, common mistakes, best practices, and additional resources. After that, we'll come back and chat with you live and answer any questions up to that point. Then we will continue with another section of training to cover transitioning from a heat pump to heat recovery, optimization tips, and final thoughts. And finally, we'll finish up with another Q&A session. We encourage you to get into the conversation. As a reminder, if you have questions or comments at any time during this broadcast, use the question mark icon to the right of the screen and send them our way. We'll answer any relevant questions until we run out of time. Again, I always do this on the Tech 90s now, guys, because we get a lot of people asking job-specific questions. So we just don't have the time to get involved in that. We have a short time that we're doing this, and that's why we call the Tech 90s 90s, because we try to keep them 90 minutes. So make sure they're relevant questions to the topic that we're discussing today. If you need technical assistance with our equipment, absolutely not a problem. Give us a call at 888-850-7928. Again, that's 888-850-7928. So we're going to get started in just a second here, but let's talk about why we chose this topic. So my first thoughts to that, and I'll get Robert's opinion here too, but you know, as I said in the part one, you know, a lot of you guys that are doing our MultiPRO single phase equipment now, that equipment has a lot of similarities to the commercial line, and there seems to be this big taboo with VRF where people think that's got to be this ungodly big job where you've got 100 indoor units and stacked outdoor units or twinned outdoor units, however you want to call it. And it really doesn't have to be like that. There's a lot of applications, and we're going to be talking about that real soon in our next Talking Comfort Live, that there's a lot of commercial applications where you're just doing one outdoor unit, maybe a couple indoor units. And we're going to talk about, you know, how that can really play a big role in the commercial world as far as keeping buildings more comfortable. So whether you're doing heat recovery or heat pump. Robert, you got anything you want to add in there?
Just like you mentioned, is again, commercial doesn't have to be, like you mentioned, over 60 indoor units. It could simply be a one outdoor unit and one large indoor unit on a gymnasium or something like that. That's another good commercial application. So kind of keep that in mind.
But you also have the ability, you know, like a big gymnasium or something, you could have one-to-ones. Like say it really needed 4 indoor units, but you could have 1-to-1, or you could have 1-to-4, depending on what way you want to do it. That's the versatility of this equipment is amazing, of how many different layouts and stuff you can do. And that's what selection software is all about, that we're going to be showing you today, is it gives you the ability to lay out those jobs. The one thing that I want to make sure I make a point of in selection software, remember, when you're laying out a job and you're using selection software to estimate your piping and all that, just remember that is your layout. That, you know, we all know the real world's not like that, right? When you go out there and run those pipes, you know, you're going to have pipes, you know, shorter or maybe a touch bit longer than what your actual build sheet shows. So it's very important that on the job you have a printout of what that piping diagram is going to be in the lengths that you had spec'd for, and you write down the actual lengths, so that when you get all done piping it all in, we can go back to selection software and change those piping lengths so that we get the correct added charge. Okay. So I don't remember if we talked about that in the video or not, but I want to make sure that's very clear. Remember, this is just the preliminary layout, so you kind of know what you're doing. And then if you're going to have drastic changes to the piping, you need to go back to selection software and see how that affects your pipe sizes or the job build itself before you make dramatic changes like that. Wouldn't you agree, Robert?
Yes, 100%. Yeah. So initially too, on your selection, all those piping layouts could be red in color, which simply means on that selection software that there's no information in there. So you literally can print that sheet, take it out to the job site, and then use that sheet to fill in the lengths, and then go back and put it in the software.
Yeah. So so what you're saying is you may need to go out to the job site and, you know, get an idea what all your lengths are going to be, write them all down, then get on the computer and put them in the selection software. That's a great way to look at it as well. Don't just guesstimate. Go get some actual measurements of what your layout's going to be. So
yeah,
that was
exactly.
great advice, Robert. All right. So go ahead, Robert.
I would say, yeah, because you don't know that beam, you don't see that beam in the diagram on the mechanicals.
Yeah, and I don't think
have to go around a beam.
The plumbers are going to be too happy if you run right through their drain stack with your refrigerant pipes, you know. And the electricians aren't going to like it if you just, you know, cut off their power supply. So, yeah, there's a lot going on in jobs like that, and there's a lot of, you know, things you got to get around or do to be able to do the piping and do it right. So, all right. Well, with that, let's jump right into it. Let's get this video going. Don't forget to submit your question, guys. This is all about showing you guys how to use the software and helping you better understand the equipment and lay out the jobs. So with that, let's roll the video.
Before I jump into the software, I wanted to show you where you can download this GREE selection software for the commercial MultiPRO. And again, we are on the GREE commercial website, and at the top there is a GMV selection software button that you click, and then as you scroll down, there are 4 items that you have to fill out: your email address, your company name, and your postal code. Unlike other manufacturers, we do not charge for this software.
Correct.
It's free. So if you have several different people in your office, they can download this software and install it on the computer. The only caveat is that you have to have a Windows-based computer. It does not play well with a Mac computer. Unfortunately, it does not do that yet. Okay. And again, depending on your company, you may need IT privileges to download and then install this software. Okay? If you don't have that, contact your IT department, and then they can download and install the software.
Excellent.
From that, again, like I said, you will get an email shortly with instructions on how to download this particular software and install it.
Awesome.
So let me jump to it. So once you install it, this is the screen that you're going to see on the software. There are 2 different ones. On the GREE Comfort website, there is a similar software that is the MultiPRO only, that gives you 2 to 5 tons, okay? And then on the commercial site, it gives you the entire gamut from the residential all the way up to the commercial.
I'm glad you explained that. That's excellent.
There's 2 different ones, okay? And again, this software that I'm using is our new 2.2 beta version. It's a field test version. And before you install it on your computer, it should come with a submittal package that's on there. Unfortunately, there are a couple file errors that will prevent you from downloading the submittals. At this time, I recommend you do not download the submittals because it's going to come up error code after error code on your computer. So don't do the submittal packages just yet, okay? So when we first start the program, you're going to click this button here that says a new project. As you notice, the first top, there is a drop down that lists the different countries that this software is sold at, or not sold at, is provided at. So make sure you go to North America and you select the North America, because if you don't, you'll notice that the hertz have changed.
Right.
You'll notice different model numbers that we do not have access to in the United States. The question has been asked before, can we automatically default this to North America and from the factory? Unfortunately, that is no. So it's just a simple drop down and you click the second one and then you can go from here. You'll notice here you can put a project name, you can put an address, you could put contact information, and then you can, down here at the bottom, you can build a client list for the regular customers that you do business with. You save the information in there, and then it will automatically populate, and then you can select it once you save the client information on there as well. Same thing here down at the designer information. So we're going to move on real quick. And the first screen that you're going to come up to is your indoor unit selection screen. Okay? And it's going to show you here all the different types of indoor units that we covered before. And here is that dual fuel A coil that Greg just mentioned before. So we have that one built into our software. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to select a couple of systems, and you have an option to go down here and use the required capacity, or you can manually select it. This information right here, the design condition, is supposed to be a default from ASHRAE. It's automatically set that. You can go in there and change it later. And you also have here at the bottom, you have the ability to put in this software the type of field configuration where the outdoor unit's on top of the roof, the indoor units are lower than that, they're on the same, they're pretty much the same, or the indoor unit is below the outdoor unit. I have mine set as a default of 12 feet between the two of them. So in this particular one, what I'm going to do is I'm going to select a couple of different air handlers. You got to make sure you double click on the particular model you're looking for to make sure it populates over here. You'll notice that there's a number there. And with this new software version, what I like about it is if you have multiples of the same unit, you can automatically put the number in here as opposed to going in there and manually repeating it.
Right, I like it.
So in this particular application, I like this setup where the condensing unit is below it. So I'm going to add it. And if you notice back here, there are my two indoor units. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to have 4 units, and I'm going to use the new 8-way ceiling cassette. I'm going to put a 2-ton in there. Going to add one. And then what I'm going to do to demonstrate is I'm going to use a 2-ton A coil configuration and add it. Now I got my 4 indoor units here, so now I'm ready to move to the next step, which is adding my outdoor unit. And you can tell at the top by the blue arrow is where you are in the process of completing your selection. So I click my outdoor unit. Here at the bottom left are my indoor units that I selected. I click the plus button and it opens up in a different window. And here is where you can select the type of system that you want. You can change the unit name from VRF1. You can call it CU-1, whatever it is. You go to the power supply, and this is where you change the power supply. If you were doing a residential, this is where you would change it to single phase. This one right here is the 463 phase, and this bottom one does not apply to us in the United States. And the reason I say that is the solar units which are not available here. So in this particular application, I'm going to pick the 230 volt. This one we're going to use the heat pump. And right here is where I'm going to change my connection ratio. So what that does is it prevents me from going above 125%.
Excellent.
Here, if you have in a particular area where you are in high altitudes, you could put that information in here because as the higher you get, it derates the capacity of the outdoor unit.
I like that.
So if you are in a particular area where the design temperature, outdoor temperature is 105, you can change it here. Okay? Once you've made that information change, you simply hit your shift key, go down to the last indoor unit, and you notice all of them are highlighted. Now we click and drag over here, and what the system automatically did is it selected what it termed as an appropriate unit.
But just so we don't get too fast, you can actually drag them in separately.
Yeah,
too.
you could drag them in separately. So, but in this particular case, you notice here that it automatically selected the ultra heat unit. Okay, you may not need the ultra heat unit. You could simply go up to the drop box and change it to a standard, or again, depending on what you have in your inventory, if you have some of the older GMV5s, you can select the GMV5. In this particular illustration, we're going to use the standard GMV6.
And did we point out already that we're on heat pump versus heat recovery?
Yeah, heat pump here at the top. This one we're going to do heat pump. The next illustration we're going to
Just
do.
making sure the audience knew. We're talking heat pump strictly right now.
So here it also gives you an option to change the outdoor units. You simply click the manual selection and another box is going to open up which shows you all the potential combinations you can use. Okay. Now keep in mind, I set my upper limit at 125%. The lower limit is automatically set to 50%. You cannot go below 50%. So you'll notice here, if I select an 8-ton unit, I am maxed out at my ratio, which is 125%. If I select a 10-ton, I'm at 100% capacity, and as we go down further, you'll notice the capacity all the way down to 50%. Where this is important is if you have a particular application where there is going to be future additions, this is where that ratio becomes very important because you want to have that available capacity down the road if you're going to add indoor units.
And you could actually put ball valves.
Correct.
On that, so you would not have to recover the entire system charge again. You would basically just be able to pipe into where your ball valves were and do your evacuation there, open your refrigerant. Now you probably need to rerun your selection software so that you can determine where you were for additional charge to where you are now for additional charge. And you can add that extra little bit of refrigerant you would need to add for that additional piping in the indoor unit that you added. Maybe you added one, maybe you added two. But something else to be mindful of, if you change that down the road, you've got to change what you did initially too, as far as charge goes.
Correct.
It may not be much, but we're going to need to change it.
Yep.
Also, we talked about, we were kind of chit-chatting about this yesterday. There's another way to do it too. You could actually, let's say you had a system that was existing, you weren't planning on doing this, you installed the whole system, but now they need to add some. You have room in the connection ratio to be able to add to them, but you don't have ball valves on the system to do it. So there is what GREE calls the refrigerant recycle mode or pump down mode. You can actually pump all that refrigerant back into the outdoor unit, store it there, and then add your additional units. You have to be careful though, because it depends on how much refrigerant you had to add to that system. And I believe in the service manual, it tells you the amount of refrigerant that you're allowed to pump back into it. And if for some reason it's not, you ever get in a situation like that, we can always reach out to the factory and find out how much you can pump back. Yeah. So as long as you're within them limits, you can do that. It could save you some time and money on the job as well. So just kind of another way to think about it.
So in this particular application, the one I'm going to select as an option for you guys is this one down here where I'm at 83% capacity. And the reason I'm doing that is because I want to demonstrate the ability to add later.
Cool.
You can, if you wanted to, depending on the size of the indoor or how many indoors, you can select the 10-ton, but this one gives me the greatest flexibility and options available. So when I select it, it'll populate it up here. It'll tell me that this is a single, what I mean single system. You're not having to twin a 6 and an 8 ton.
Right.
So the ones down here, as you see, the 62%, it's showing you 2 different models. So that means there is twinning involved with that one. So once I select it, again, it's going to let you review everything you have here. It'll provide airflow ratings. It'll provide your heat values that are there. So the next one we go to is going to be our piping. Now, when you select the piping, you notice the system automatically defaults to include Ys. And the reason it's showing the Y like this, Greg demonstrated earlier today with those Ys is you don't stick the thumb up. The only reason it's doing this is to show you the illustration that that's a Y.
Right.
Because if it was that way, it would be difficult to see it.
Right.
If you don't like this configuration, you can change it. We can change this thing several different times, and the way to change it is move over 3 icons, and it's going to ask you here, it's a reset button. You click the reset button, it's going to ask you, do you want to reset it? You click yes, and now all your indoor units are off the page, and now you can go in there and design the system the way you want to. This particular application, what I'm going to use, because I know I'm doing that future job, I'm going to install a Y, and you'll notice I cannot click and drag into it and it automatically connects. You got to drag it on the page, click, and then drag back. Okay? And once you notice that check mark turns green, you're okay.
Right.
So from here, I'm going to drag a T-type header. I prefer T-types. It's just the preference for me. And now I'm going to drag it, and you'll notice that it's okay. But let's just say I want to change it because I accidentally connected it to the wrong part. You simply go there, highlight it, hit your delete key, and it's going to delete it so you can restart it. So again, I'm going to bring in my T-type, and I'm going to put it on the bottom. That way that top is open for those future units. And as Greg mentioned, this is where you're going to put your ball valve.
Yep.
You can also, if you wanted to, is put ball valves on here on your indoor units.
Right.
So remember, as I mentioned before, this is only showing one direction. There is another one coming back.
So let's talk about the ball valves for a minute for future use. Just in case. Okay. Put the ball valve on there, but you also need to put a piece of pipe on there and cap it.
Correct.
Don't just leave the ball valve shut off.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good way to have a potential dump the whole charge in the building situation.
Yep. So the other thing that here you can drag the units. It doesn't make a difference if unit indoor 3 is connected first or 4 or however. But one of the good things about the software, and Greg and I will touch upon that later on, is I cannot skip the first connection. It will not allow me to miss the first connection. And that is especially important if you're doing heat recovery on a heat recovery mode.
Well, obviously they're telling us this for even with a branch. They're telling you that that's a no bueno. So wouldn't do it.
So now I just simply drag whatever unit to the first one, and you'll notice here it changes to a green check mark. Now it's connected.
I guess what I'm trying to say is if the selection software is not letting you do it, that means you shouldn't be piping it that way either.
Correct. And then now we can just simply click and drag. As I mentioned before, you can't just simply make one smooth transition. You'll have to drag it on the page. So we just simply connect it. And then when we are finished here, now it's going to ask us to put in the piping information. Okay? And here it's very important that we get this right. So here is an example. The line that you see here is red. That's coming out of the condensing unit, going into the first TY. And remember, on my illustration, I put the condensing unit down below, and then the units go up top.
Right.
So when I normally do this, if I don't get the piping information, I use ASHRAE standard defaults. So coming out of the outdoor unit to the first TY or the first T-type header, I always put 50 feet as a default. We can change that. For those of you that like to do this, you round it up.
Right.
We don't do the half, so we would do 52, obviously. And again, because the elbows account for almost 2 feet of the total equivalent piping, I like to add those in my selection. You may not put them in yours, but I do, because here I have 4 total elbows coming out, going up the wall, and then into the building. So that's 4 for a heat pump.
Right.
For a heat recovery, that's 6. So I just added 12 feet to my overall piping length. And then from here, you can go in here and, like what Greg was talking about.
Just a stub.
Exactly. Without, you can do 1 foot. I like to do 1 foot, which again, for us, 1 foot is about that long, right? So I put 1 foot in here, and then it's the next connection to your T-type header. If we don't have any information, I like to use 25 feet, and then I will do at least 2 Ys. Okay? Again, you don't have to put the Ys in there, but I'm just adding the total equivalent piping length as a demonstration. And then here is what you can put whatever you want based on the information. And again, once we're done with this, you can always print it out, give it to your contractor, and he can put it out in the field, and they can make those adjustments, those number adjustments in the field. So,
Again, this is preliminary stuff, so it's not going to be your as-built. It's very important you come back and do the as-built so that your charge amounts were correct and you're making sure all your refrigerant lines are proper size.
correct.
So again, okay, so you got some larger units there, but we'll take ID unit number 2 as an example. But let's say that IDU number 2, which is a 3-ton air handler. No, number 2, up in the...
Right here?
Yeah.
Yep.
Let's say that was a 9K, and you only got 10 feet there. Let's say you, for some reason, you decided, well, you know, that's not going to work there, and you put that at 60 feet. But you didn't redo it in selection software. Your pipes are the wrong size.
Correct.
Is what I'm telling.
And you'll notice here what Greg was saying, the maximum length from the Y to the indoor unit or the T-type is 50
feet. If you're going to exceed that, you need to recheck in selection software and make sure the pipes didn't change size.
So you'll notice too here at the bottom, it's saying it doesn't provide the necessary refrigerant charge is because we're missing information. That's why it's not providing it for you. Once we provide that information, again, we can add that later on at a later time. So from here, we can go into our wiring. And this is the standard wiring that you follow when you're out in the field.
Correct. It's CAN bus, it's daisy chain. You're going to have that D1 and D2 on the outdoor unit, and it's literally going to follow a daisy chain pattern. So if you want a more vivid example of that, if you go to GREEcomfort.com and go under MultiPRO, and then you go under our quick start guide, I got some really clean pictures of how you should do that wiring, you know, more real world, right? Not just an elementary diagram like this. But the point to that is your D1 and D2 outside, it's not required to use grounded shielded cable. It's highly recommended to use a grounded shielded cable. It needs to be 18.2. It needs to be stranded wire. Reason why I brought this up many times in trainings before, you know, there's a why stranded wire. Okay, well, the way I answer that is, how many extension cords in your lifetime have you bought that had solid core wire? Because it's not flexible. Stranded wire is more flexible. It's going to be more tolerant to all those bends and everything else that you got to pull that wire through. So when you make your connections, when I say grounded shielded, and there's a good example of that drawing, like I said, in the quick start guide for our single phase. They're wired exactly the same, okay? But I highly recommend you ground it on the outside, and then you're going to go D1 and D2. You're going to land those on the screws at D1 and D2 on the indoor unit. Then you're going to have a D1 and D2, another set of screws. Every air handler, every MultiPRO system has 2 sets of screws for you. One for one set of wires to land and one for the next set of wires to land. It makes it really simple. You don't have to wire it out or anything. So then your next unit going in, so like we're going from indoor unit number 4 to indoor unit number 1, you're going to have screw terminals for all 4 of those wires. And then you take that ground wire and all you do is don't cut it off, fold it back on that thermostat wire casing, but twist them together and then tape around both cables. That'll hold it nice and tight for you. And we know that ground's not touching anything else. You follow that pattern all the way to the last indoor unit. Now cut that ground off, because you're only going to have that ground wire hooked up at the outdoor unit. You're giving it one path to ground to shield away any interference. And then lastly, you have to put the matching resistance on there. So the outdoor unit comes with a 120 ohm quarter watt resistor that has to be connected across D1 and D2 at the last indoor unit to stabilize that CAN bus and give you proper communication.
So that resistor is included in the outdoor unit.
Correct.
And the operator's manual or owner's manual.
In the bag.
That's in the bag that's normally located above the compressor. Okay?
Yep. Which
In the
95%
event-
of the time they throw it away.
Yeah, in the event that you lose that little wire, that little black resistance wire, we do not stock them. You have to go to Amazon and order them from Amazon.
And
to
they
get
need to make sure it's a quarter watt, 120 ohm.
them. Yep, minimum. You can get 100 of them for like, what, $6?
$6.
$6, something like that, yep. So again, that's very important that you install that resistor on the last indoor unit on this particular illustration, okay? In the heat pump mode, it may be slightly different.
And as you
Or
also
the heat
see
recovery.
from the selection software, it's populating, since those are air handlers, it's going to come with the XC770 controller. The cassette is going to come with the YAP1F remote. And obviously the dual fuel coil doesn't come with anything, because you're going to use your standard thermostat for that furnace. That control box that's on the front of there, that is relocatable. I want to make sure I point that out in that picture. You see that control box. It can be moved to the left side of the cabinet. It can move to the right side of the cabinet. Your low voltage wiring will go into there. Your D1 and D2 will hook up there. Your 24 volt signals will be transferred from that board, telling that machine what to do. Okay?
And you'll notice here too that it automatically, as Greg mentioned, populated a thermostat. Anything that we have on indoor units that's ductless will automatically come with a wireless remote.
Correct.
Anything that is ducted has a wired controller. You have the option to change or add thermostats to these by simply double-clicking the thermostat, and then it's going to open up the different types of thermostats that you have.
So remember, you're doing that as an accessory.
Yep.
Because the controller that they list there is packaged with the equipment. You can purchase a different controller if you wish.
It'll give you options here in that window. If you wanted to add the 24 volt converter, you can add it, and let's just do it here as an example. I'm going to click and drag, and I'm going to bring it to the top. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to do it for all of them. So that one, you notice that? It's not letting me do that one. So that's nice to actually
Good,
see it.
because you don't need it.
Yeah, because it's
I like
not,
it.
and this is that A coil that we were talking about.
Right.
It's not letting me add a controller to it. Once
Cool.
I have the controllers added, I simply hit confirm, and you'll notice now I got multiple wired controllers
Okay.
for that particular one. In the event, the next step here, if we had the piping, it would give you the total length of your communication wire, but since we don't in this particular application, it zeroes it out.
Right.
But the next step here is if we are going to add a central controller to the system, we have the ability to add it here. We simply connect or add the centralized controller, And now we're going to click and drag our systems that we want to connect. If I had multiple systems up here, multiple indoor units, I can simply just click and drag them and put them in here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down and select the appropriate one, which is the 52. I click and I drag and then I let go. But I want to point out to you that this happens quite a bit. You notice here, it's asking for a master controller. That has to be done in order for that centralized controller to work. You can also add here, which is a new feature, if you want a backnet, you can add the backnet.
Cool.
So it took out both. See, it looks like you can't do it. And to answer Troy's question, right?
You can't do central controller and backnet at the same time.
Yeah, in this particular, so it kicked it out. So,
Yep.
So that answers your question, Troy. You can't do it. It's one or the other.
There you go. And so then that also tells me Cool Automation is the same way. No, wait a minute, no.
You
Cool
can do-
Automation you can.
Yep.
Cool Automation is capable of integrating with backnet.
Yep. Yep.
Okay.
So once you've got it here selected, you can actually go to a preview tab, but this is where you would actually look at and pull in the submittals, and as I mentioned before, we don't have that yet, so bypass this and go to your report. And then from here is when you can make it and pull it up as a Word document. Right now with this particular program, the Excel function is not operating, so please select the Word document and make sure you select the group, which happens to be all our systems. Check your document box. The CAD option, we don't have that, so mine is not selected. For those of you that have that, you can set it up on your particular computer. But again, keep in mind, this is the beta version, so that may not function properly. So from here, all I'm going to do is I'm going to give this a particular name, and I'm just going to call it test. And the most important thing here is to make sure when you save this, you save it to the appropriate file on your computer.
Yeah, so use the browser, select the file you want it to go to, make sure it's going in the place you want it to land.
Exactly.
Yep. Otherwise, you'll be like, okay, I know I
Where'd it
saved
go?
it, but I have no idea where.
Yep. And then all you do is just simply hit export. And in this particular case, it's going to bring up the selection. And again, this is that Word document that we talked about that will give you all the information on the particular project. So here is the project summary. It'll tell you the outdoor units, it'll give you the quantities, and then here it will actually give you the accessories that you have selected with that particular system. Some of these remotes are automatically included, as we mentioned. The wireless remote is automatically included, and I believe these two wired controllers were automatically included. So you don't have to add that to the cost. And then here at the bottom, you will see also too the actual, it's showing you here 13.67 pounds. Remember on our piping, it didn't show it, but here it's giving you a total of that. And then on the piping, it's not 100% accurate because it's showing you 50 feet of half-inch hard-drawn pipe.
Right.
So, and then as you further scroll down, you can get more detailed information on your system. You could see all that, and I'm trying to scroll real quick to the actual piping layout. I preferred the Excel document because there was tabs at the bottom, and I could simply just jump to that particular tab. But let me just scroll down here.
There you
And
go.
then there is the piping. So this is the one that we talked about where you can print this up and you can give it to your install crew and tell them, please install
Right,
it.
and they can write the dimensions right on there as to what as-built's going to be, so they can bring it back to you and reload.
Yep, and also the wiring diagram is also very similar to that, where you can give them the wiring diagram right here.
Exactly.
And it shows you the communication, how you're supposed to wire that D1 and D2.
Right. With that, guys, we're going to take a break, and we will show you heat recovery.
All right, welcome back, everyone. We're going to get into our question and answer session here now, but evidently Robert did a phenomenal job with talking about selection software because there's no questions. So we're not going to just jump right back off. We'll give you a chance to throw them questions up there. So don't forget about that ask question button. Go ahead and get your questions into us, and we will do our best to answer them. But I thought we could talk a little bit more about selection software and commercial layout and stuff like that. I mean, the selection software, oh my God, there's so many different ways you can do it, with the headers and the Y branches, and I guess the other thing I'll kind of talk about too is, so on the single phase, if you go to GREEcomfort.com instead of GREEcommercial.com, go to GREEcomfort.com, we have the System Builder app, which that's more computer based, and you can build up on your systems there. The difference with that though is if you do more than 2 indoor units, it defaults to a header only. It doesn't do multiple Y branches. So if you're going to do single phase and you're going to do more, if you don't want to use the header and you want to use multiple Y branches, then we want you to use the single phase selection software, and you can go in there and lay out your job using multiple Ys, and that way you'll get your charge correct and you'll make sure your Ys are laid out properly. So, and there is advantages to using multiple Ys versus using a header sometimes. One example I can give you is right here at my house. So my condensers are all the way on one side of the house, and then my 2 guest bedrooms are all the way on the other side of the house. So it just made more sense to run that piping through the crawl space to pick up my air handler and the wall mount on the one side of the house, and then to pick up the 2 other wall mounts on the other side of the house using multiple Y branches, because I use a lot less piping doing that way. And I've got one direct run across there. I didn't have to worry about centrally locating the header and staying within that 49-foot rule, because if you go over 49 feet from your header or your Y branch, your pipe size is going to change, and it's not going to be the same size as the connection at your head. And we talked about that, I believe, already in the video. If not, it'll be coming up in the next segment of the video, that if you're using a header and you have to upsize the pipe because you went over 49 feet, then you've got to reduce back down to actually connect to that wall mount or cassette or whatever. So, that's why we try to tell you, make sure with the header that you're putting it in such a location that hopefully you're staying within that 49-foot rule, so that you don't end up having to upsize pipe and then downsize pipe to actually make your connection at the indoor unit. The other thing you could do is, if some of you guys are using doing any multi-zone mini splits for GREE, a lot of the multi-zones come with those adapters, because you have to size to your line set to the indoor unit, and then you reduce it down to connect it to the outdoor unit. Okay. So what I always tell guys is, a lot of times, so if you do a multi-zone and say it's a 3.5 ton, and you don't run all 5 circuits, and you're going to have extra flare adapters, and they're really nice because they're all brass. So you don't have the copper stub anymore. So hold on to those adapters. They could come in handy for you later. So, and you could actually use that adapter. So like, say you need to reduce from 3/8 back to quarter, you might have an adapter that came with one of those mini splits that you can use to adapt it back down. Okay. And that's something that we're looking at, trying to bring some adapters for you guys for those situations where if you have to upsize the pipe, we can just use a flare adapter to adapt down, because we really don't want you cutting off the flares connections at the indoor units. We want you to stay with a flared connection. That's what the manufacturer, that's what GREE wants. They want that to be a flared connection. I believe we talked about that either in segment 1 or segment 2 of this whole broadcast, that, you know, if you cut that off, when you get past that flare and you get on the machine side of that copper, that's metric, that's not standard. So some of your fittings are not going to seal to that. And then also, if you braze on it, you got to be really careful too, because you could actually damage that screen that's on there. So that's why we really just say, you know what, let's stick with the manufacturer's recommendation. They put a flare on there, they want it to be a flare connection. Okay.
Right.
So, but just things to think about if you're, you know, doing this whole layout. If you can avoid not having to upsize and downsize, that's the best way to do it. If not, keep in mind, you're going to have to make that adaptation. So that's why I said also with the multiple Ys, that can be beneficial to you too, because, you know, like example for my house, come into the crawl space, I got that first Y that picks up one unit, then about 3 feet, we pick up another Y, picks up the other unit, and then we go all the way across to the other side and we pick up that last Y. And with that last Y, I only got about 20 feet of pipe to those other 2 wall mounts. So I know I'm within the 49-foot rule. All the pipe sizes match the connection at the indoor unit. So it's not hard. It's just something, you know, I don't know if you're aware of it. I don't know how many guys have actually done systems like this, but I'm trying to give you those little tidbits that will make connecting the units up that much more simpler. So, Robert, you got anything you want to add to that?
Again, you can also use a combination, just like what Greg was talking about. If you got the longer runs, you can use on one side a Y, and on the other side, the T-type, you know, the T headers. The biggest thing you got to keep in mind with the T-type headers, there are 2, and they're designed to sit almost on top of each other.
Yeah, they stack.
So you got to have the space for both of those. So you got to make sure that as you're getting ready to put out your piping. So,
Right.
And then again, mount your piping in accordance, use the duct hangers and everything. So there are no droops in it. There are no potential stress points in any of that, which could, you know, result later on in potential leaks.
Right. Yeah, and you got to keep it 100% horizontal. You cannot stand those. You know, I've had that question on how many times is whether or not they can install a header vertically. No, you cannot install a vertical header vertically. It has to be hung horizontally and level. And then Robert and I always say 3 feet.
Yep.
The actual rule is closer to 24 inches, but you got to have 24 inches between Ys. You got to have 24 inches between 90-degree bends. So the easiest thing to do is just kind of stick with the 3-foot rule. That way, you know, you got enough, you know, so because it's a lot easier to just, you can estimate 3 feet real easy and know you've got at least 24 inches versus trying to estimate 24 inches and end up with only 18 inches. Right. So just, you know, err on the side of caution. I'd rather you go a little longer. That doesn't hurt anything. But if we're below the actual requirement, that could be a problem. So be very careful with that. You do have to have that dimension.
Yep.
Robert, I don't remember the exact. Was it 20 inches or 24?
It says 20 inches. It's like 19 and 5/8 or something like
Okay.
that. We always go up because, again, we're males. We don't read manuals and we don't bring out tape measures. So
Yeah, that's true. So I'm really amazed. Robert, you must have just done one heck of a job here. So
Yeah, think you
there's
did a
no
great
questions
job.
coming in.
So I got a couple of things
Go ahead.
to refresh real quick. So
Sure.
for those, again, to make sure the selection software you're using is the 2.2 version, and where you find that out on your software is at the top bar under that black header where you see the plus sign, you see the folder, you see the pencil, and you see that little setting. There is an icon there that is an eye with the circle on it. You click that, it'll open up the selection software and tell you what version you have. You want to make sure that's the 2.2.0, which is the latest and greatest that GREE has to offer. And again, where do you get this from? It's from the GREE commercial website. At the top, you will notice there is the GMV software section right there, and that's where you click that button, and that's where you fill out that form, and then that's how you get the program. Again, keep in mind, this is designed for Windows-based computers. It does not play well with Apple. You may install that bridge, I think it's what it's called, but it may not work properly and you may have some issues in the field. So again, please keep in mind, stick with the Windows-based programming on this so it actually functions correctly.
Yeah, unfortunately, we don't have any control over that.
Yep.
That it won't work very good with the Apple products. So, and I know there's people out there who love their Apple products, and I got nothing against them, but for this software, it's just not working very well for us. So,
yeah. And it may work, it may not, and it may on that one particular crucial job where you need it, it may not function. And then
right.
again, so
And make sure you're saving your layouts.
Yep.
Because
Yep.
when you do that job layout, like I said, it's preliminary and you need to come back. If you already got a saved file, you don't have to start all over. All you got to go in and do is go in there and change your dimensions.
yep, exactly.
Like if your pipe length was supposed to be 20 feet and ended up being 25 feet, and you got another one that was supposed to be 30 feet and ended up being 25 feet, whatever. You need to go in there and do an as-built selection software so that we get the proper charge amounts and everything for the job itself. So the piping, you know, when it comes to this type of equipment, inverter-driven equipment, it's very important that we follow the proper piping rules that are in the selection software that's applying those rules. And it's very important that you follow those rules so that we get proper oil return, we get proper refrigerant flow, we don't have turbulence of the refrigerant flowing, we don't have noise in the refrigerant pipes, those types of things are all things that's going to come up if you don't follow the proper piping procedures. Okay. So I can't stress enough that these systems work very well, but you need to follow the proper piping layout, piping instructions. Otherwise, you're going to have problems. So,
Yep.
Hey, Jesus, you've been installing a single phase MultiPRO system in your house. And I believe you're using a header, correct?
Right. Yep.
You got anything you want to share there about how things were going for you as far as piping and stuff like that?
Yes, of course. So this is kind of what I wanted to mention about, selection software. Not only is it, pretty much a guarantee to what your additional charge may be, but let's say, for instance, you're not actually using the software and you're doing it manually. You have everything written out and you're doing the calculations to go ahead and confirm the additional charge. Well, what you can do is, once you have it set manually, go back to selection software and throw that all into the program and just see how accurate you are. So pretty much like a confirmation if you're close and if you are using the correct numbers, and if obviously if you're a little bit off, you just trace back and see exactly what's different from what you got manually versus what the software shows. And so pretty much like a checkpoint, I guess you could say, checking up on your manually calculated line sets and the sizes that you have. But yeah, so as far as at my house, so this is what I did. I kind of just zoned out, several areas of my house instead of just going back to traditional, one air handler serving the whole home. And so what I did was I actually installed 2 of the 3 indoor units first because I don't have the actual air handler yet, or the gas furnace. I have the dual fuel coil, I have an air handler, and I have a wall mount. So what I did was I threw it into selection software with just the air handler and the wall mount. Obviously it gave me the additional charge. And whenever I get ready, what you had mentioned earlier, when I get ready to install that furnace, well, I can go back and add that to my selection. And then it'll give me that additional amount that I need on top of what I already added.
Right.
So,
And we've
Yeah,
talked
it
about that too, because you got a situation where you still don't have the furnace shut and you're going to be adding that piping later. So, and I know I talked about this either in segment 1 or segment 2, or part 1 or part 2 of this program, but Jesus knows how to do it already, and the other machines do it as well. There's cautions you got to have in there, but when he goes to add that other system, he'll be able to put the machine into refrigerant recycle mode, or that's what it says in the manual, but it's actually pump down, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Now, keep in mind, you got to set it up for the machine to go into refrigerant recycle, which is going to pump all the refrigerant in the outdoor unit. But as much as we want that unit to be smart enough to be able to close that liquid line to your indoor units when it goes into refrigerant recycle, it's not quite that smart. You do have to close the liquid line service valve in order to get to actually pump into the outdoor unit.
Right.
Now, on R32, that might be a different story, because from what we're understanding is there's going to be a solenoid in there, because when it goes into when we go to R32 with this equipment, when it goes in, when you get an alarm on the indoor unit, it is going to close that solenoid and stop all refrigerant flow to the indoor units, so you don't lose the entire charge because of a leak detection. Okay, which I think is really cool. But whether or not that solenoid could be closed during a refrigerant recycle, I don't know yet, right? But it's possible. But again, even if it doesn't, it's not the end of the world. So when you put in refrigerant recycle, you close the liquid line service valve. You can have your service tool on there. You can have your gauge on there and verify it's pumped all the way down, and then close the other valve, and then you're done. And then all you got to do is you can do one of two ways. You can go in and on the display or with the red buttons, and you can actually take it out of, stop it from refrigerant recycle, leave the unit powered up, or you just simply pull the disconnect. The only thing that I caution people about is if you're doing this in the wintertime, which you can, do not leave that machine powered off for any real long lengths of period of time, because now you're not energizing the crankcase heater. So when you go to start that unit back up, it's just like a brand new install. We got to preheat that compressor with power to it before we ever start that compressor back up. So we make sure there's no liquid refrigerant in that compressor, because when it's cold outside and that unit's not running and that all of your charge is in the outdoor unit, it's going to want to migrate to the coldest point in that unit, which is going to be trapped up in the oil of the compressor. So be careful of that. If you guys ever have a failure on one of these units and you're waiting on a part, do not kill the power to that unit. Let it stay out on air code. Kill the power to the indoor units if you want, so they don't run. Leave that outdoor unit powered till you come back with that part, so that crankcase heater stays energized the whole entire time you're waiting for that part.
Right.
Okay?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So, all right, with that, we didn't have any questions. So again, we're going to play another segment here, the rest of the video. So we kind of get into, bear with me one second, I lost my train of thought. So we're going to talk a little bit about transitioning from a heat pump to heat recovery, optimizing tips, and final thoughts. And then we're going to come back and do a live Q&A again. Okay. So with that, we'll go ahead and run that video. Like I said, guys, get your questions in there. I'm sure we couldn't have covered everything in there. Surely you got some questions. So again, get your question, use that ask a question button, shoot your questions over to us, or even comments. Do you like what we're doing? If you like the broadcast, we appreciate those kind of comments as well. So with that, let's go ahead and run the video, and we'll come back with the live Q&A.
So what we're going to do is we're going to take that same selection that we did in heat pump, and we're going to convert it over to a heat recovery situation. So I'm still in that. What I did during the break is I changed that one indoor system that had that A coil. I changed it to a sealing cassette, just for an illustration, because I didn't know if it was going to cause any problems or not. But now that I'm actually back in my outdoor unit, I can simply go into this edit box here. I click it, and now all I have to do is go back up to the top, and now I select heat recovery, and I hit confirm. Everything is here. It's showing me the same unit, because remember, one unit does both functions.
Yep.
So the model number didn't change. So again, here I'm going to go in, and you notice it went back to its default. I'm going to select one. I'm going to select the 10-ton. There's my 10-ton unit, and now I'm going to go into the piping configuration. So because it is a heat recovery, the system automatically defaulted to the one-to-one mode exchangers, okay? And again, you can either leave it at that, or we can go in here and select the appropriate mode exchanger. Since I have 4, I can simply add it. And remember my height difference. Now I can add it here. And I'll get into the other selection there. There was a parallel or a series connection. And this is the parallel connection, okay? Now I simply click. And
So drag that, try not to put it at number 1. Okay, it did let you do it, but you got 4 units, you're going to use up all slots.
yeah,
But just so you guys know, if you ever you're using a mode box, and let's say you've got
Here.
less units than the possible mode boxes. Oh, you're going to do it? Okay.
yeah, I'm gonna do an 8-port and
I want to see what the software does anyway, because I want to know. And we'll get to our method of badness here.
So, like what Greg was saying, it does. Look at that.
Okay.
Let me
See if it'll let you do it to all of them. Okay. Wanted to point this out because this is a huge ordeal. Even though selection software let us do it, do not ever abandon port 1. Always use port 1, because if you do abandon port 1, it can cause problems. Now, it may be a software fix that GREE did in the GMV6 mode boxes to keep that from happening anymore. But I know for a fact on GMV5, if you abandon port 1 on the mode box, it can cause issues. Okay.
Let's see that real quick. So I'm going to go back in here and I'm going to change it to a GMV5 model.
Oh, it lets you do it.
It does?
I think it does.
Let's see that.
Well, let's try it.
Yep, it does.
Yep. So GMV5, GMV6, regardless, do not abandon port 1. Or if, more so, because this is not going to matter. When you go to physically pipe this on the job, it's not going to matter. Even though you put it on port 2, 3, 4, and 8, you don't have to follow that when you get out to the job. You can use ports, 1 through 4.
Mm-hmm.
And not use 5 through 8. But what I'm saying is, don't abandon the number 1. Always use number 1, then you can use whatever other ones you want. Okay?
So to fix that, you simply highlight it. You notice it's got the little balls at the end of it. Hit your delete key and it will move it. And then now you can bring it back in and put it on the appropriate port that you want it to.
So,
Okay.
like I said, physical piping on the job, do not ever abandon port 1. Even if it's a 2-port mode box, you have to use the number 1 port. So,
Okay.
all right.
So this is pretty much the same we did before. Then you would go in there and put your piping information. It would show you all your wiring information. The same thing as the heat pump. The only difference now is this is your mode exchanger.
Yep.
And we could actually go in and change it again and go to a 4-port 2 or however you want to do it.
Right.
There is an option to do pass-through, but we'll cover that in a future thing, so we can move on.
Yep.
So,
all right, I think that gave them some pretty good examples of that. We're going to move on. I'm going to follow up on a question while Robert's getting it loaded up. We're going to go ahead and go to the mode box installation instructions. But I want to follow up on another question. It was asked about, let's see here. It was asked about what is the proper way to test outdoor unit sound level, distance, and all that. If you go to and just Google search ANSI AHRI standard 220-2022, if you pull up that document, and it gives you exactly how you go about doing decibel readings of outdoor units. Okay, does it cover indoors too, or? Okay, so Steve Love was in here in the room with us, and he said, yeah, it actually covers measuring sound level for both indoor and outdoor units. So, all right, cool.
So real quick, I went back to the website and I wanted to point out real quick, there are two different mode exchanger boxes. Okay,
Yes.
There's one for the GMV5 and there's one for the GMV6.
And they're not interchangeable.
Correct.
You have to make sure you're getting the right mode box. So, okay. All right, so what we got here, Robert?
So we got here is illustrations on the mode exchanger box, how to properly install the mode exchanger. So if you notice in the top diagram, the top portion is at the top. We got to make sure that we mount that mode box correctly.
Okay.
And then it's also going to show you right here, again, leaving a proper clearance or a maintenance access port if you guys have to work on that mode exchanger.
Yes.
You need to make sure you have the appropriate room and space to get in there.
And that's on the piping sides to be able to get into. If you got to do anything with the refrigerant piping, it's the same thing on the one side where all your control boards and stuff are. And then on the other side where you just have your piping coming off of the other side of the unit, you know, make sure you got plenty of clearances all the way around that mode box where you can actually service it for future service.
Yep.
Just because you can hook it up doesn't mean you can service it.
So we also want to show you the proper way to install a mode exchanger.
Yes, if you've seen in that first example, you can't run your branch pipe like that and then go up and into the mode box. It has to be straight across. And then your branch Y pipe there, they're showing you, again, it's hard for them to do it in a diagram, but again, that Y branch is not, you know, it's laying flat.
Yep.
It has to be flat. So even though the picture kind of looks like it's standing up on end, it's not. It's got to be level.
Yep.
So.
And down here at the bottom, they're showing you the top side of that mode exchanger has got to be to the top. It can't be down. The top of that, the lid cannot be down. And they're showing you here, it can't be mounted horizontally.
Right.
Okay?
Cool. That was the main pages we wanted to cover there.
And then we also wanted to talk about real quick, Greg, is those silencers.
Yes. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Yes, they come shipped in the box, and you absolutely have to install those.
What
So-
are the silencers for?
Well, they do two things. One is it's for refrigerant flow, and I think a lot of it has to do with turbulence of refrigerant and noise. So,
And again, there are two come in each mode exchanger box, and you got to make sure that you install them correctly. Right? Okay.
you know, the thing is, and I've said this for years, you know, as a matter of fact, when I was in the field, I worked with an older gentleman and all the time doing installs. And the one thing that he said to me years ago when I was first getting into the trade, he goes, "Look, Greg, it doesn't take any longer for you to do a neat job than it does to do a crappy job." He says, "Take your time and install it neatly. Install it like you would want it in your own home." And I just always held to that. Pipes should be straight and neat. You know, snap a blue line, make sure your pipes are straight and neat. When it comes to commercial buildings and stuff like that, I mean, if you walk through like big, you know, like ballparks and stuff like that, and you see all their conduit and everything, all that stuff is ran neat and straight and raceways, and we should be taking that same pride in our work in HVAC is what I'm getting at. So take the time to make sure you're following the documents, giving yourself proper clearances for future service, make sure it's easy for you to get in there and work on it, make sure you can you service the unit in the future. You know, a lot of installers look at it, well, that's the service guy's problem, I don't have to worry about that. Well, okay. Well, kick the guy in the shins before he even gets a chance to work on it, right? So, okay. So now we're into the owner's manual / installation instructions, correct?
Correct.
So this was an interesting piece that came up, and it's about clearances for the outdoor unit, and it's about tying the refrigerant pipes together. And we were, me and Robert yesterday were trying to digest the information to make sure that we understand it correctly, and also piping configurations for heat pump versus heat recovery and stuff like that. So you need to make sure you're following these proper clearances. They're listed in here. You had brought up about the fact that your clearances change when you are in a pit, with parapet walls versus open airflow.
So the illustration that we're seeing right now is for parapet walls. And you'll notice that there are different types of configurations. Straight across like that or front to back. Those clearances are important because we need to dispel the air, right? Or the heat.
Dispel the heat or absorb the heat.
Yep. So and that one right there was for, and it's going to come into play when we're doing twin units. Okay.
So before we jump into all that though, let's go to page 6 and 8. Page 6. This is the most important thing. Depending on, I think you're too far, right there. Right there, okay. So they show the pipings, primarily looking at your piping connections 1, 2, and 3, right up there. So again, we said this unit can be installed heat pump or heat recovery, okay? Now, this is not in the service manual. So the only place you find this is in the install manual. I am working with GREE to get it put in the service manual because it needs to be in the service manual, and it needs to be, in my opinion, a little more clean cut and plain as day, right? So if you go to the next page, so where that comes into play is right here. So if you're doing a heat recovery, obviously you're going to use all 3 pipes, 1, 2, and 3, which is low pressure gas pipe, high pressure gas pipe, and your liquid pipe. But then when you're doing heat pump, you're using, and they just call it gas pipe. In my opinion, that should say high pressure gas pipe because you're not using the low pressure gas pipe when you're doing heat pump. So it's going to be 2 and 3, which is going to be when you're facing that unit, if you want to go back to that, it's going to be center and left. That center pipe is your hot gas pipe. It is not, I hate saying this sometimes, but I'm pretty sure I'm right. GMV5 was not the same. You used the far left and the far right. So kind of an FYI to everybody, this is the only place it's dictated in there. And I'm working on getting that uploaded into the service manual as well. And I would rather just have a picture like this right here, and it clear cut heat pump, and then another picture, heat recovery.
Heat recovery, yep.
So it's very clear. Anyway, so we want to make sure we pointed that out. And then let's go, since we're still in that install manual, let's go to page 19. All right. So this is where, so let's go up a little bit where it showed the piping straight across, right? So as you can see in that first illustration, figure 3.3.3, as long as we're keeping our pipes all on the same level coming out the front of the unit, this is not a big deal. When we start doing things like you see in 3.3.4, we got to be careful. So let's go down one more. This is on page 19. And they're telling you, so let's cover that right there, 3.3.5, if you want to point at that.
Right here?
Yep. So right in there, you know, they're showing you got to have a little bit of slope with the pipe. That's fine. And then they're showing you going, you can't come out of the unit, pipe up, and go level. That's in the next one down, 3.3.6. So let's kind of highlight that for them right in there. And then the last one is an even more crude example of don't do this, which is 3.3.7, okay? The one that got a little bit more confusing was 3.3.8. So they're saying here, okay, now we got to have an oil trap in here. And we're trying to digest all the information. It says when distance A plus B between the outdoor modules exceeds 6.5 feet, a U-type oil trap should be added at a low pressure gas pipe, as is no more than 6.5 feet away from the outdoor unit manifold. The height drop among the outdoor units is 0 meters, okay? So, we drew this up, and this all comes back to your dimensional differences from the unit. So if I can get Nick to bring that camera around to our dry erase board over here. Okay, so what we did, the 8 through the 14 ton all have the same cabinet sizes, okay? So they're all 53 inches wide. So this rule that we're talking about, if you do the dimensions then, because of our distance of 43 and the 10 inches here, so you got 43 inches from roughly the center here to the end of the unit. Then from the end of the unit to about the center of the pipe is about 10 inches. So that's our 53 inches, okay? So if we've got, how do we do this again? So it's 53. So what we're saying is the 78 inches that was doing, help me out here, Robert. What was we doing there? We were doing 53 inches. 6.5 foot max. That was the 78 inches. Thank you. I had to get my brain turned back on. Okay, so if your maximum is 60.5, so you've got your 43 and your 53, you got to subtract that out. That's where we came up with our maximum distance between the units is 25 inches. You can't exceed that. If you do, then you got to do that trap.
But that only applies if the pipe goes down below the condensing unit.
Correct.
If it's horizontal, like we showed in that one picture, you do not have to
go back up, we go back to our owner's manual here. Oh, it was just up a couple pages, right there. If your pipes are all level straight across like that, you don't have to worry about it.
Correct.
It's only when you're dropping down. If you exceed what we're saying here on the dry erase board, you got a maximum of 25 inches that you can have separation between those two units you're piping together. Otherwise, you got to put an oil trap in.
Correct.
Okay? This is for the 8 to 14 ton. Those dimensions change up a little bit. You kind of do the math the same way on the 6 ton because it's a little smaller cabinet. And it actually gives you a little bit more. You can have a little more distance between them because you got a smaller cabinet unit. So
now that applies to parapets. If you're doing it out in the open, it changes that dimension quite a bit.
Well, you're talking about clearances
Yes,
wise. I'm talking about
the pipes.
the piping clear. You cannot go more than 25 inches in this application without adding that oil trap.
Yep.
As long as you keep less than 25 inches between those units, you don't have to worry about the oil trap. You're talking more for clearances depending on whether you're in a pit or open air or whatever. So, yeah, I mean, you're not wrong, but this is something else when we're looking at clearances that we got to pay attention to because whether or not we need to add that oil trap. It all has to come together in the end, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, we met at the clearance for the parapet, but now we didn't put the oil trap in.
Correct. Yep.
Or vice versa, right?
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yep.
okay, that's what we wanted to cover there. All right, I'm glad we pre-did the math on that. Otherwise, I'd have been looking silly. But I look silly all the time anyway, so I don't care.
All right, welcome back, everyone. Hope you enjoyed that video clip we had from our live broadcast. That we felt that was really good information, and we wanted to share it. We wanted to be able to get it up on YouTube, and then you guys can refer back to it if you need to. I think we covered a lot of good information in the video. So with that, we're going to jump right into questions. So Jesus, we got any questions in there?
Yep, we sure do. We have Lance. He's asking a question regarding MultiPRO. He says, I have a question for the MultiPRO system with core automation with a Crestone thermostat single head system. 3 each systems? Customer wants the heat during the day to 70 degrees. Then at night, he insists that he wants it to be 63 when he falls asleep. So he lowers the temperature to 55 to get there faster. Outdoor temperatures are about 48 to 58, excuse me. We are using the return air sensor to get the room temp. He says the controller is reading 59 degrees, but it's too hot for him. I know the settings are nonsense. They are asking me why that's happening. My guess is the fan coil is freezing cold and inside of it is 59 degrees.
Okay, so that's a great question, and I'm not that familiar with that Crestone thermostat, but I got to believe in that this is tied in through BACnet somehow, or building automation of some sort. That's how we're able to use that particular controller versus a GREE controller. But the bottom line here is what I think is what you got going on here. And I'll use my system at home for an example. I've got a GREE wire controller in my living room, and it is connected to an air handler. And I use the controller to sense the temperature in heating mode. I use the return air sensor to sense the temperature in cooling mode. The reason for that is in heating mode with these systems, the fan does not run. It doesn't come on until you get a call for heat, and then the coil warms up, then the blower comes on. So if that indoor unit is located in an area where, you know, like for my example, like for mine, my air handler is in the attic. So if that blower is not running, even though it's insulated duct, after a while, that temperature of that return air sensor is going to be picking up that attic temperature. Okay. So it's reading much colder than it actually is. But if I put it to sensing the temperature in the room using the controller for heat mode, then I'm getting a more accurate temperature reading of the room. In cooling mode, I use the return air sensor because with GREE systems, the fans never shut off in the cooling cycle. They run the entire time. They run at a very low speed, but I'm always moving air across that return air sensor, and I'm getting an accurate room temperature that way. And I'm keeping the air, and with the air moving like that. So I got to believe that's some of what's going on there. Is we really need to sense the temperature in the room using the thermostat or controller in heat mode. It's one of the things that I think that MultiPRO does very well is they don't run the fan when that particular indoor unit's not calling for heat. You got to remember too, if you have a multi-head system, so in other words, you got multiple indoor units or more than one indoor unit, you will have, when one unit's calling, if you hook up a service tool to that, you will see that if only one unit's calling for heat. Let's say I got a set point of 72 degrees, it's 68 in the room. This particular unit is running in heat mode. I've got 3 other units that are not running. They're not calling for heat. They're simply off, fans off. Okay. The EVs will still be open, bleeding refrigerant into those coils. So we don't want the fan on, because if the fan's on, you're going to overheat the room. So we do a good job with not overheating rooms for that reason, but it needs to be able to bleed refrigerant because the amount of refrigerant in the system, they need to be able to bleed off some of that excess refrigerant in heat mode to obviously keep pressures and stuff like that under control. Right. So, Robert, you got anything you want to add to that?
Nope. I think you said it well.
Yeah, I got to believe that's what's going on there is we're sensing the temperature in the, in the return air, it's in the attic or something like that. So, and there's a lot of things you got to think about too when it comes to your controls and your setup and stuff like that. So like my my living room, for example, I've got a vaulted ceiling. My vault is 15 feet high. My registers are in the ceiling. They're up high. So what I do in heat mode is I set the fan speed up a little bit, because if I run it in auto in heat mode, I don't get enough throw off my registers and I don't heat the room right, because the heat gravitates across that vaulted ceiling instead of being pushed down toward the floor and making the room warm. Even though I've got my registers high and my cold air return is low, close to the floor, I just don't have enough push. So I usually run that fan about medium high, so that when it comes on in heat mode, I'm getting that throw off those registers to make the whole entire living room, kitchen, dining room area feel warm, because I'm pushing that heat down closer to the floor. So, now if my registers were in the floor, I'd probably want to run it on auto, because heat rises. So I only need to get it out of the register. It'll rise on its own from there. So again, it's not just the system. You got to think about, where are my heat runs? How is the job? What do I need to change with the system to make it work for the application it's in, is what I'm trying to say. So you just got to put a little thought in behind it. I can tell you right now, where I live, it's a fairly new development that started in 2012. And it's, buy now, build whenever you want. And I've been in a bunch of these homes up here, and most of the homes are on crawl spaces. And I'm absolutely just floored at how many houses I've walked into where the registers are in the ceiling, and so is the cold air return. I can't imagine those systems heat very well, because if your cold air returns in the ceiling and you're dumping heat out of the register in the ceiling, that heat's going right across the ceiling, right back into the return air. So
Right.
it's something else that I think, the little bit more discovery should be done. So with my builder, that was originally the way it was laid out with my house. I said, absolutely not. If I'm putting registers in the ceiling, I'm going to have the cold air return low. So we used part of my kitchen pantry to use a chase to be able to get that return low. So, sometimes you got to work with the builder, or, and make sure that, if it's a new construction, that, we're making sense of how our airflow is going to be, so that we do heat the rooms properly.
Right.
Just other things for food for thought. So
I did want to add on top of that, Greg, just so another thing to consider, one thing that I've seen a lot back when I was on the field is the positioning of the registers. There were so many times I would go to a house and they're like, well, I'd be there for another issue, but they were like, this thing that really cools really well. And then you come to find out there's literally a register pointed directly at the thermostat. So, I mean, what is that going to tell you? It's going to cool off. I mean, as quick as the air comes on, it's going to already satisfy temperature. It's going to start shutting down. And in inverter-driven systems, they have that time delay for when they actually do turn off. So, it's just going to take a little bit for it to react. And
so Jesus, if you had that scenario, what was your fix?
I would either damper off the return grill, the supply grill, or relocate it, or relocate the thermostat.
Okay, that would be my suggestion, because unless you're going to relocate the register, you need to relocate the thermostat.
Right.
Because systems are designed to move a certain amount of air, and if you block off that register, now the system's not moving the required amount of air. So realistically, the best thing to do is move the controller if you can't move the heat run. And most people aren't going to want you to move the heat run, because now they're going to have a hole in their floor,
Exactly,
or ceiling, or whatever. So
Yep.
the easiest thing to do would be move the controller. I say easy, it's not easy. You got to move wire. So, but like we always say in HVAC, that's the electrician's problem.
Yeah. And I think another good thing to bring up would be, what type of grills you're using. Are you using just a single, the single path registers, two path registers, three-way stamp? What kind of register are you using? Because you can easily just flip a register if you're not, if the customer's their bed or wherever wherever they're staying isn't in the right position, you can just flip that register to throw the air another way or toward the wall, versus it going towards the center of the room first. You hit the
And
wall.
let's not forget, you know, with commercial equipment, with the single phase MultiPRO equipment, thing that we really need to talk about. And sometimes it takes a little convincing and a little bit of conversation with the end user, right? Or the person purchasing the system, right? But these systems have a much higher energy efficiency rating without ductwork. So using the ductless indoor units is the way to go, because that's going to be the most efficient system versus using a ducted unit or an air handler, stuff like that. And I say that because I have an air handler in my living room, but you know, when you're married, you know, you gotta give and take a little bit, right? So I got my wall mounts in the bedrooms, but she absolutely was not going to have them in the living room. So, and you know, you can't really put a cassette on a vaulted ceiling too good. So, so we went to the air handler for the living room, dining room, kitchen. So, you know, and laundry room. So it works. But if I could have avoided it and had all ductless in here, indoor units, that'd have been the way to go. That's the most efficient systems, is getting rid of that ductwork, because the efficiency loss through ductwork is huge.
Right.
So anyway, any more questions come in? Hey, Jesus.
Not necessarily questions, but Lance just made a comment. He said, "Great info, that helps." He said, "But are you concerned about the outdoor temperature? Unit is in the closet that's hot."
Units in a closet that's hot. Well, yeah, because if that's units in the closet that's hot, it's going to think the room's warmer than it actually is. So that should be helping them, not hurting them. If I'm understanding that correctly, right? So like my air handlers in the attic, gets really cold in the wintertime. That's why I need to sense the temperature inside the room. But when in the summertime, using that return air sensor with the fan running all the time, and it's all insulated duct and everything, I found the most accurate room temperature reading in cooling mode is using that return air sensor.
Right.
I've tried it both ways.
Yep.
Now, I also say with GREE controllers, and I'm sure as well with other thermostats, that I have found that the temperature is typically going to read about 2 degrees higher than it actually the room temperature is. And that's because of the consumption of power within the controller.
Yeah.
And you generate a little heat in the controller itself, and it actually falsifies the temperature a little bit. So it's not really bad, but yeah, I found the GREE controller is about 2 degrees off. So as long as you know it, it's not that big a deal, right? So all right. Any other questions?
No, I think that's it. Yep.
All right. Just want to say one thing more to Lance. Lance, if you want to get deeper into this discussion, and maybe we can help you out some more, just give us a call at our technical service department, 888-850-7928. Again, that's 888-850-7928. We'll be happy to discuss it with you further. So, all right, guys. Well, if that's all the questions, I think we're going to make this one of our shorter Tech 90s and actually get done on time for a change. Imagine that. So, Robert, again, thanks so much for doing what you did with the selection software. I think you did a phenomenal job explaining all that and showing how to use selection software. I've been doing tech support for this equipment for quite a while now, and I get a lot of questions regarding, you know, the nuances to using the software and stuff like that. So I think this is going to go a long ways. I also want to, you know, let the audience know too. So obviously not too long from now, we're going to be switching to R32 with the MultiPRO single phase. So there will be another updated version that's going to cover R32 MultiPRO single phase. And then eventually when we do transition to commercial R32, there'll be a new version for that as well. Okay. So That's already been in talks and it's going to happen. So once that equipment comes available to us, we'll definitely have updated software for that. So, all right, with that, I think that's it. So as always, guys, agree or by your side.
By your side.
Side.